Okay. The stream has started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new season of Talking About Survivor. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Martine.
And we're here to talk about Survivor, David versus Goliath, Season 37, Episode 1. So, one of the things that had not really even occurred to me until we were in the run-up to this new season was that I hadn't really picked up on the fact that Survivor's really just been in the same location for a while, and seems like they're sticking with it. And that perhaps is part of the reason that they have returned to this real emphasis on the different themes, because they have to do something to differentiate the seasons if they're not changing locations.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I didn't either, but apparently, it's not like something they announced explicitly. It's more it's an observation, but it's like, now that they say it, it's like, oh, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess they have been in Fiji for a while. Last couple of seasons at least, and apparently the upcoming ones are staying there too. And so that's actually a production decision that they've sort of settled in there a little bit. Which, I'm sure makes a lot of sense from a production standpoint, not having to have a completely different location where you have like different national governments that you're dealing with every season. Having a more longer term relationship probably makes some of that easier.
Yep, I think so. Yeah, they're probably right now helps. They probably save money and time doing it this way, and it allows them to, if they can keep it interesting without changing locations, then it allows it to keep the show profitable and on the air. Then
yeah,
fine with me.
Going strong.
New places,
Yeah. Well, I think in the past they've found some interesting stuff just in terms of having a slightly different flavor to different regions. But, the game is not that different. Mostly, I think when we had different locations in the past, it really mostly just came down to, are they in a place where they can have water challenges or no? Right? Maybe weather variations too, right?
Yeah.
Are they in a place that's going to have typhoons or no? Apparently, this season, they're in a place that's going to have typhoons.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your first impressions, high-level thoughts? We got a new season started.
It seems fine. Nothing blew me away. It was nothing. There's interesting characters. The setup is fine. Again, it's not like, oh my God, this is the coolest setup.
Right.
It allows for people. What I do like about it, just like the way that what these themes always do for us, is it gives the contestants a little bit of permission to lean in to the stereotype.
Yeah.
And that's kind of fun in this one. I kind of like how, the Davids are, they're kind of embracing, what makes them unique or socially awkward or, kind of goofy. And the Goliaths are, almost tongue in cheek, like chest pumping. Some of them isn't tongue in cheek, but most of them it is. And I like that self-awareness of like, especially I think I'm really going to like the wrestling guy. Because he just seems like he gets that it's a show.
Right. And it makes sense too that as a pro wrestler, in addition to obviously the physical attributes you would need to have to be successful in that profession, a big part of it has to be all about having a performer's charisma and, being able to play to an audience, right? So that's makes good TV.
Yeah, and so I didn't write down any of his exact quotes, but there was some great just stuff in some of his confessionals where basically the impression I was left with is him being like, yeah, I'm the most Goliath, like, I'm so awesome. But he's like smiling and winking the whole time.
Oh, sure. Well, the list of names that just went on and on and on.
Yeah,
That
that he
was
used as like a resume as
yeah.
opposed to, you know.
Well,
But
and he the delivery of that list was so great too, just because he had a very expertly performed rhythm to it, where it was almost like a roller coaster, where you kept thinking he was wrapping up the list, and then he'd start a new batch, and it was just like he played that tension of how long is this list really expertly. I kind of, enough so that I noticed and was like, wow, he made reading a list of nicknames very entertaining.
yes, and then then there were some other confessionals with him where you could tell that he's much more humble than he plays. He's much smarter than he lets on.
Yeah.
And so he's just kind of an early guy I like watching.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, kind of on that note, I mean, he finishes that list by kind of pointing out, but I'm not playing as those guys, I'm playing as me. And that was just, I mean, he strikes me as smart and savvy in addition to being strong and charismatic, and that's going to be a powerful combination in this game.
Yes.
So we started, I guess, at a high level thought too. I mean, where I kind of ended up with was just that I think what was otherwise a mostly unremarkable but solid season opener was unfortunately marred by the medical evacuation at the end, and especially it feeling so abrupt because the accident happened when they weren't on camera. Right. Not that we wanted to see it happen necessarily, but it just meant we come back from commercial and it's like, wait, what? He's already in a stretcher? What's going on? It felt very abrupt. We didn't get any lead up to it like we sometimes would.
Right.
With other types of medical evacuations.
Yeah, and it was, it was sad to see him go. I think there was a little bit on purpose of, they played up a little bit some of the discussions that he was potentially a first vote. I think looking back at it, that was probably, like I said, a little bit on purpose so that you feel, not that you want him to go out, but that at least you feel like the integrity of the game is still there because it's not somebody who was like a favorite to win. In fact, he might have actually even gone home tonight.
I didn't get the impression that he was in real danger because I feel like even though he came on pretty strong at the beginning, it seemed like most everyone kind of came around to at the end to, boy, I felt bossed around a little bit, but hey, look at the shelter. I don't think we would have gotten it up and been this good if he hadn't been pushing everybody. So
that's true.
Yeah, it felt like most everyone kind of came around to that, and everyone was more talking about Nick, at that point. Which, yeah. Well, if we're going to get into details, though, let's go ahead and start at the beginning. So we're introduced to the concept there on that weird sort of platform boat that was. Looked that way because they built a challenge on top of it, I guess. What it actually made me think of, though, was Mother Base from Metal Gear Solid 5, which is a reference that only people who played that game will get. Anyway, the producers are already like leaning heavy into the whole thing. They let Goliath get onto the boat first and sort of assemble and look all, camera pose ready, and then make a point of Angelina is talking about how, hey, our tribe looks really good, we look strong, everyone's kind of good looking, and then the David tribe, and like, oh, look at them, they're all awkward and gangly or something coming up. And I mean, I felt like the narration and sort of the framing really sort of played up that idea, but I felt like if you had the sound off and you weren't hearing that commentary, I don't know that it really would have come across as dramatic as they were trying to make it sound. It seemed mostly like one tribe gets off the boat and onto their little stand, and then the other tribe does. They didn't look that different to me, I guess, but maybe I just wasn't. I don't notice the same things. So. Okay. Fair. We noticed it. Everyone notices different things. Maybe I was just maybe I was having a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction against being told what to expect from the appearance. You know what I mean? Maybe that was some of it. But in any event, the first person we hear from is Christian, who is a robotics nerd, but he thinks he'll maybe surprise some people. We get Elizabeth, who is the girl in the cowboy hat, and she talks about being like one of 12 kids. And Pat, we meet Pat early on here as he's I wrote down maintenance manager, but I think it was actually property manager. That's what he said later, I think. But in any event, we also, over in the Goliath tribe, we met Natalie, who's the newspaper publisher, the oldest on her tribe at 57, I think she said.
Yep.
And then Angelina was, talked about fairy tale life, Yale graduate. And here's going to be my first and only time that I'll mention this minor complaint, which is that I think that there were several times where they had someone talking and didn't show the little name label. And I feel like like Angelina was one of the first people shown, and they had her name the first time she talked, but then she had that whole narration of everyone coming on board the boat, and they didn't show her name again. And I had forgotten, because I've seen her for a total of 7 seconds. So I was like, I didn't remember. It's like, is this the same girl that was just there? Do I have to rewind to see who this is? And when I'm trying to take notes, I had some awkward spots where I had to take notes, just describing people, just by their physical appearance, and then go back in my notes when I figured out what their name was later. And I was thwarted briefly by the fact that on the David tribe, the two black men were both wearing pink shirts. So when I was like, okay, so this is the, African-American man in a pink shirt. Wait, oh no, there's another guy. There are different pink shirts, the lighter pink shirt and the more vivid pink shirt. And then eventually, obviously, I learned that they were Carl and Davy. Was Davy or Davy or it was some weird spelling. Anyway,
Davy.
Yeah. It seems perhaps we wonder, does he really go by Davy usually, or is that just to avoid conflicting with the tribe name?
Yeah, he said on his bio page that calling him Dave or David instead of Davy is a pet peeve of his.
Oh, okay. Well, good to know. So you, having actually read the bio pages, know more than I do. I didn't even look at them. We didn't get a chance to do the pre-show this time, and I went in just totally blind. And so maybe that's also part of my complaining about not knowing who the people's names are at the beginning. But in any event, we get introduced briefly to a couple more people. We hear from Nick, who talks about growing up in a trailer in the holler, which just immediately made me kind of like, oh, he's a character.
Yes.
And so he's now a public defender. And then here's where we first met John, who's a pro wrestler, but he mentions also he has a geology degree. We meet Allison, who, points out, yeah, I always had this legion of support, but I also know how it is to be an underdog, because nobody wants to ever believe that they don't know how it is to be the underdog. But that actually leads Probst into a point that he seems like he really wants to make in a strong way, which is to say the division of the tribes here is not based on one tribe has always had to work hard and the other hasn't, because it's not about that necessarily. It's about sort of invisible advantages. And so it's not about who, you know, like one tribe has always had to work hard, the other tribe has always had it easy. It's more about like which background leaves you best able to take advantage of any given new situation you find yourself in. Having had to scrap for everything the whole time, or having been more thoroughly prepared by having, resources and, more education perhaps. Although some of that is a little bit blurry because, Christian's the robotics engineer, like it's not like you do that without a degree. So anyway, but that's all how all these themed tribes always wind up, right? It's like, some there's edge cases.
Right.
So in any event, we get to begin this reward challenge with some interesting choices where the Goliath tribe gets to select not only who they think their own strongest man and woman are, but who they think the weakest man and woman on the David tribe are. And those will be the competitors for the challenge. And then to balance that choice, the Davids get to choose which combination of obstacles each team will do on the challenge. And certainly I would think that the latter seems like the better, like if you get to make one of those two choices, if you got to pick which choice to make, getting to pick which obstacles to do seems like the more advantageous option. But it's all a balance, right? Because you could guess wrong and like say this one seems like it would be hard, and then maybe it's not. And likewise, the other tribe, is trying to guess weakest, but how you're not going to be able to predict that Christian writes slide puzzle algorithms and can solve the puzzle in 5 seconds. Right. And then complain that he could have done better, except he made mistakes.
Yes.
That was amazing. That little montage of him. He's an early favorite for me too, just because he's so dorky.
Well, yeah, and he's an example of leaning in on the other side.
Yeah.
He is dorky, but he's absolutely like playing to it.
Well, it's kind of hilarious that because they didn't know each other's names yet, when the Goliath team is picking who they're going to pick from the David tribe, they say purple hair and Big Bang Theory. And it's funny. It's like, yeah, okay, yep. I mean, you look at that group of people, you know exactly who they're talking about.
Exactly who they were choosing.
Yeah. And you can kind of see his face kind of going like, yeah.
But also with that algorithm on the slide puzzles, in his bio, he talked about one of his hobbies was puzzles, but he said he wrote a computer program that crate trained his dog for him.
Huh.
I'm not even sure how that works, but
I don't know. Maybe I could imagine something just being like automating signals for like, how to indicate to the dog that they should go and be in their crate. Like, just like you might say, go to your spot or something like that.
Yeah.
And if you have a dog trained to do it to some sort of an automated signal, then you could set it on a routine and then the dog gets used to it. I'm speculating here, but that seems like something that might be what he's talking about.
Yeah. I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know how you would write. I mean, I don't even know where you'd begin to write an algorithm to solve a slide puzzle, and how you would understand, how you would also like have such a deep understanding of it that you can lift it into real world solving yourself. Like, that's pretty smart.
Well, I mean, it's true too, though, that, slide puzzles, even though most people, I think, don't spend enough time thinking about slide puzzles to really grasp it, but somewhat like Rubik's Cubes, my understanding is that there are actual techniques that if you follow, you are going to solve the puzzle way faster than someone who's kind of just doing it by instinct.
Yes. But I think what was interesting about it is that it wasn't a slide puzzle in like making a picture or a word phrase. Like they were sized, right? They were all different sizes.
Yeah, they were different size blocks, and the goal was not arranging them in a certain order. It was moving them to a place where one of them could slide out the bottom.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that it was a non-traditional slide puzzle also, and he still knew how to, and the same techniques worked. I mean, I'm sure.
Well, I think that
was still interesting to me.
I think ultimately the fact that he did the algorithm is maybe not the part that makes him so good at it, so much as writing an algorithm probably required him to have a lot of experience with slide puzzles. And then that experience is what really helped solving a real one.
Right. Right. Because what it shows is that he didn't write, like he didn't write an algorithm the way that, for example, like chess program algorithms are done, where they like they go back and analyze games. Like, you don't have to know it. You teach it how to analyze games that have been done, and it learns from that. You know, you have to have a cursory knowledge of chess, but you don't have to be as good. And in the way that he wrote this algorithm, it's not like it just analyzed slide puzzles. Like, he taught it a way.
Yeah. Well, yeah. He taught it a way to classify the starting position and then apply certain techniques, rules for how to decide what move to make.
Right.
But in any event, he's really good at slide puzzles. And like, that's an example of something like that. No way anyone could have known that without knowing him. Right. And so who are you picking? Are you picking someone who's turns out to be really good at puzzles? Maybe you pick someone who turns out to really be bad at puzzles. It's and also too, when Probst brought it up, he did phrase it as the weakest, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they were thinking of it in terms of let's choose the people. I mean, I think maybe they would have put it together that you're making a choice of who we're going to compete against in the challenge.
Yeah.
But so we have, so we have Christian and then Lirsa, which is a name I'm not familiar with, but she's from Puerto Rico, I guess. She is the, aforementioned nicknamed Purple Hair. Yep. And she also kind of mentions that she was not really surprised to be picked just because, she's small and doesn't necessarily look like she's the most physically fit. So she's like, yeah, she's the weirdo. But in any event, it's kind of interesting seeing the seeds of what develops even over the course of the episode, which is, the Goliaths already kind of congratulating themselves like they've got this in the bag. And then, Christian kind of leaning over to whisper to Lirsa's like, don't worry, we're going to help each other. We're going to do a great job. Just being supportive amongst themselves rather than performative.
Right.
But what did you think about the choices in terms of choosing which obstacles they were going to do?
I mean, I thought that they did a good job. I mean, I was a little concerned about their choice of the second obstacle. The first obstacle, I think they did perfectly. The one where you have to place the bridges, to me, was obvious that it would take the most amount of time, and it didn't matter if you were strong or not.
Right.
It wasn't. There was no physicality to it. It's just doing the task, as opposed to just like quickly walking around the side of the boat. That one actually almost. Like, I feel
it turned out to be a bit harder than they expected, I think, because the ropes were sort of looser than you might have predicted.
Right. And so I think that had the situation been reversed, they probably could have could have gotten across the plank bridge as quickly as the Goliaths did, which albeit slower than going around the side. Yeah. But I think that the Goliaths might have been even faster at going around that rope, because you had to be able to basically lean yourself all the way backwards, hold yourself, and also move.
Right.
And I think they were both clearly stronger and might have been able to do that a little bit faster. The second one I wasn't as sure of, because I think they chose to go underneath the one.
Yeah, the crawl under as opposed to the tube.
Yeah, I thought that looked more difficult
Yeah.
than the tube, or there was a third choice that I actually was surprised that they didn't use, but I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
But
I don't recall specifically either what the third one was, but yeah, that one, that was tough. But yeah, my kind of instinct too was that I would have rather done the tube than the crawl under, because if it's tight and you're having to kind of push through, it's a really awkward position to be in, crawling so low to the ground. It's hard to get leverage.
Right, and with the two, and I think that we saw it play out exactly how you and I just described, in that the Davids were well ahead after the first one because the bridge was more time consuming, and they made up the difference going through the second obstacle. It just so happened that he didn't need a whole lot of head start on that slide puzzle to just win.
That was kind of amazing, because it's like you could sense the camera operator suddenly having to scramble over there to oh wait, he's already finishing it. We have to so the camera was still moving over to the puzzle as he was sliding the thing out. So it was the sort of thing where you got the sense of he just blasted through that way faster than anyone could have expected.
Yes.
So I guess so even though they lost some time in the crawl under, they had enough of a lead from the first thing and then just blasted through the puzzle. So they won handily and got the lumber and tools, which is a fairly substantial advantage. I mean, just to go into the larger season context a little bit, even though they did actually lose this immunity challenge, it wasn't that far off. And over time, having a really solid shelter is going to be a substantial benefit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Especially if the weather's going to continue to be this bad. It was so obvious, towards the second half of the episode, who's one side, awesome shelter. Other side, they kind of have a shelter. Sort of. But in any event, so they get the stuff, and then we hear Christian talk about there right after the challenge, his how he was able to do the puzzle so fast. And then I loved that we went to the confessional where they actually did a time-lapse montage to suggest that he kind of just went on and on and on about the slide puzzles to the camera all by himself, and just was talking about he lost a second or two because he made some mistakes, and it's wow, this guy is such a nerd, but in an awesome way. I thought I was really pleased with him. So after that, we came back from commercial with Mike on the Goliath tribe, and briefly talking first about how physically he feels like he stands out a little bit, in the sense that he is not the obvious young, muscular, good-looking type the way many of the others on the tribe are. But, I hadn't sort of immediately recognized him, other than having a bit of a reaction like some of the other tribe mates of wait, I know him from something. And they ended up settling on The Amazing Race. But then I was, no, he's the friend in School of Rock, the one that was the real Mr. Schneebly, the teacher. And then apparently he also wrote School of Rock, among other things. So he's had some success. And I was kind of interested that, maybe if I had been paying more attention in the run up to the season, I would have been more aware that he is another sort of, not a big celebrity necessarily, but certainly more than a total stranger. He's someone who has been in a major Hollywood picture with a notable role.
Yep. And
written some others. Yeah.
Written some others and done a really good job. So
yeah. Also having been on The Amazing Race, apparently.
Yep.
Which I've watched a season or two. It's also a good show, but we're not. This isn't talking about The Amazing Race. But it was interesting though that they recognized him right away. So it's kind of like, unlike some types of people who try to disguise like who they are or what they've done. I wonder if the fact of the theme on this one makes it sort of more automatic that people are going to want to know what everybody else does and what their life is and that sort of thing. Because like, that's like part of the theme. So everyone wants to know, like, how do you fit?
Well, especially him, because he is one that, at least from an appearance standpoint, looks, he looks more like the Davids.
Yeah.
He's a little bit older and not as physically.
A little bit of a geeky type.
Yep.
Yeah. And then he and Natalie really, to me, felt like it's those two, and then the other 8 are kind of 8 of a kind in a way. Or from more so anyway.
Classification, yeah. I think they're interesting enough that they'll separate themselves.
Oh, sure. I don't mean to imply that they have no differences or that they're not interesting in their own right. I only mean that if you're going to try to divide the tribe into 2 boxes, it's very obvious that Mike and Natalie go in one and everybody else goes in the other. That's kind of what I mean, I suppose. If you're going to do some initial sort of categorization of them.
Yeah.
But let's say we also met Dan, who is a SWAT operator, I guess is the term it seemed like he was using. Or maybe I'm misremembering. But in any event, he talks about having been a cop and having been a fat kid, and then having to clarify that he was also, I guess, heavy as a cop, but it was wanting to get on the SWAT team that inspired him to get into shape, which he obviously successfully did because he looks great. But it was interesting having that little bit of a depth to him in the sense of him being still a little bit unaccustomed to, but pleased with his newfound confidence. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, he's a SWAT officer. He is.
Officer, I guess. I don't know why I was getting operator, but
yeah, no, SWAT officer. And what I think was interesting, just to me personally, about him is that this is a very similar story. My brother-in-law went through a very similar story in that, he was a cop, and he I guess it was a little different. He was, a high school and collegiate athlete, and then he was a cop, but got really overweight and did want to join SWAT, but couldn't because of his body weight. He was also up like near where Dan was, and decided that he was time to make a change. And he was just determined, like took care of all of that and like got down to it where he could have gone and qualified for it. He ultimately, he's not a cop anymore, but he went through a little bit of the same self-determined journey of like, I really want this. And it was very similar to Dan. So I kind of identify with what happened, because I was, he's been my brother-in-law the whole time that happened. So
yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So we also get with him sort of it's a instant twoo love with Kara, where they're both almost immediately in their like first conversation laughing about how like, oh, we're gonna be the showmans, you think? No, we shouldn't. Should we? Maybe not. No, let's do it. Okay. And they're just doing that whole thing.
I thought it was funny.
I didn't dislike it. I'm just amused by it is all. Their whole conversation about the kryptonite and then Kara, Supergirl thing felt, what it made me think of is that Breakfast at Tiffany's song, not the movie, but the song about these two people like having nothing in common except they both kind of remember a movie in common. Although I think you and I have had a conversation about that song in a totally unrelated sense. We don't have to rehash. But I guess my point was, it felt like they were both working really hard to make lining up pop culture references, and they didn't quite line up, but they decided it was close enough. So I was amused by the whole thing, but also just kind of laughing at them laughing that they were doing this really fast and yet still doing it.
Yep.
So over at the David camp, this is where we have Pat setting himself up as construction manager. And at least at the beginning, I was writing that it seemed like it was very endearing how he was doing it, because it didn't seem at first anyway like he was ordering people around so much as saying, I'm really good at this part. And so if someone else wants to do this other part and is someone good at that, we can just coordinate this and start to organize. And it seemed very endearing to me and not bossy. But then, of course, we cut to a few people talking about feeling like they're bossed around a little bit. But just the same, he seemed to be coming on very strong of really pushing, like, no, we're going to get this shelter done. We're going to make the plan. We're going to do this thing. We're doing it right now. We're going to work hard, and then we're going to have an awesome shelter. And even though people felt pushed around a little bit, I thought it was kind of interesting that they successfully built kind of a really awesome shelter in sort of, given the weather. This was sort of record time for Survivor to have a shelter that was that good.
Yeah.
I mean, they had like a day 15 shelter on day 3. Just to.
Oh yeah, with all the things that you normally get, yeah, and
and
like improve and do all that stuff. Yeah.
Lots of room, big nice roof that actually, and just especially you compare it to the other tribe, which they had almost nothing. But this is where we have a few people kind of commenting on that. Meanwhile, the shelter building over at the Goliath tribe is not so organized.
Oh, show. I thought you were like people were commenting on what we were saying.
Oh, no. So I just meant some of the other people on the tribe were commenting on how they felt pushed around a little bit, like he was just really coming in and taking charge and ordering everybody around. And it rubbed a few people a little bit the wrong way, but they also kind of came around to seeing that they actually got a lot done and sort of recognizing like the outcome is worth it. But of course, we don't know how that might have all developed given more time. Because Pat might have been the sort of guy that, he finished the shelter and he's on to the next project, and people eventually start feeling like, when do we get to rest? Who knows? But over at the Goliath tribe, less organized, and we talked to Natalie a little bit, feeling the age difference, sort of recognizing, she's 57 and it seems like they're all 25. And she's kind of used to being in charge. She's going to try to take sort of an organizational role herself. But then, of course, we get Natalia, which I only say with a tone just because it's similar to Natalie. So I'm just trying to distinguish the two names. But she's the one that sort of has friction of that, of like, we're doing all the work. She just wants to boss people around. And I don't know. Did you feel drawn to one side or the other in that argument, or?
Yeah, more to the Natalia side. I got the feel. I sensed the Natalie not helping kind of. I didn't see her as bossing them around, but I see how they felt like that was what was happening.
Yeah.
Because she wasn't getting in and working. She, and she even admitted, like, I have trouble because I don't have the natural authority of just being the boss. Like, I don't remember how she exactly said it. Like, she's used to having young people as employees and she can tell them what to do, but because these young people aren't her employees, like, she's not as good at telling them what to do.
Yeah.
And so, so I think I see how they came to that.
Yeah, I think that I was sort of initially more on Natalie's side, but over the course of the episode kind of switched, because I just felt like every time we cut to Natalie, she was just sort of standing with her arms folded, scowling.
Yeah.
And I just started to feel like even when the scene was not about that, it just felt like that's all she was doing all the time. You know, like every time we see her, that's what she's doing. And I'm like, oh yeah, that would get old really quick.
Right. And even if it's not all she's doing it enough that they can get enough on camera. And that's what they're reacting to, is her doing that and acting like that. Even if it's not all the time, it's enough that it's annoying to them.
Right. Well, and like maybe we can contrast that with what Pat was doing, which is, sure, he's kind of, you know, bossing people around to an extent, but he's also working really hard. He is doing as much or more than as anybody else.
Right. And that's exactly what I was saying before. It's not that she was trying to like tell people what to do or exert authority on them. It's that she wasn't willing to participate, that she was acting like she was above it and that they were going to do what she said, as opposed to, I'm also working and I'm telling you what to do to help me, which is more of how Pat's was, which, I mean, it rubbed people a little bit the wrong way at first because they were being told what to do, but they recognized that he's also participating in what he's asking them to do. He's just making the decisions unilaterally, and that's what they're frustrated with.
Yeah.
But they got over that because they saw it was working and that he was also, again, helping.
Yeah. So we have, this is where we have Jessica, bless her heart. She's 19, but her biggest challenge is she's worried that people will underestimate her because of her age. So she's telling everybody she's 22. And I was just thinking, that is such a 19-year-old thing to do. To tell people that you're 22 so they don't underestimate you when you're actually 19. I mean, it's just like, it, you know, you get a little older, you start realizing there's not that much difference between 19 and 22. It's not really that different.
No.
Certainly not in a game like this. Like, I don't know.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yeah, you're still the same person. Like, yeah, maybe they don't have the perception that you're a teenager, but it doesn't.
Yeah. So in any event, I didn't really have anything against her so much as it was sort of, I felt it was just like a little bit precious that she thought that was this secret she needed to keep, was that she's really 19.
Yes. I mean, and just I'll quickly reference a couple of things off of her bio page, because it just keeps reiterating like how 19 she is.
Go ahead.
So her hobbies are going to the beach, traveling, shopping, and working out. Again, that's fine, but you know,
those are all fine.
Pet peeves are not saying bless you when someone sneezes. People who chew with their mouth open and people who interrupt. If you could have three things on the island, it's my toothbrush and my pillow, and then also my Bible, because my relationship with the Lord. That one's fine, but it's like we kind of so each one of those individually is not bad, but when you sort of add up the triteness of
there's not a lot of depth to any of those things.
Right.
Like even being religious is, you know, it's a fine thing to be. I'm not criticizing that. But that said, if she is a religious person, the idea that one of the three things she's bringing is a Bible is a very sort of expected thing to say, right? It doesn't require any depth of contemplation of your own personal needs or desires. It's just like the obvious one of the three things. And it's also still the third one she mentioned after toothbrush and pillow.
Yes.
Which, you know, again, it's fine. She's 19. It's just, she's very 19.
Yeah, like that's what I said. It's exactly what I said when I read those, is that they just exhibit like how she is 19. I mean, these are the things that interest her, like beach traveling, working out, shopping, you know, interrupting, saying bless you when people sneeze, you know, toothbrush, pillow.
Was her pet peeve when people don't say bless you?
Yes.
That strikes me as a little weird to have that bother you.
Right, and that's what I'm saying, because there's not a lot of, she's only 19, there's not a lot of other things that bother her at this point.
I guess, yeah.
I guess, you know?
I'm just like stuck on that one. That one just feels like a weird thing to have a problem with. You know, it's one thing to be the person who says bless you, but like to get mad even if you don't say anything, but just to be internally irritated if someone presumably doesn't say it back, doesn't say it to you when you sneeze. Anyway, that's fine though.
Anyway,
but yeah, so this is where we meet Jessica. There was some business of Pat way up in the trees looking a little bit precarious. And I got a tiny bit spoiled only in the detail that there was some kind of an accident that happened. And I didn't know anything else before the episode, only that piece of information that there was some kind of an accident. And so I was like anxious for a big chunk of the episode, mostly Pat up in the tree and the pole vault part of the immunity challenge were the parts where I was like, in hard driving rain, that looks like a recipe for someone to fall down that hole and hurt themselves.
Yes.
It seemed like there was a couple of close calls anyway. But obviously he was fine, at least at that point. We do have Jessica being proactive about going out and making a bunch of alliances. She connects with Carl, who talks about how he sort of expected to be a little bit more laid back to begin with, but he sees people already going out and doing things, so he's going to do that too. And then, here's where we have Lyrsa connecting with Elizabeth. And this was another bit that I was amused by, just similar to the proto showmance with Dan and Kara, just in the sense of they're so different from each other. Nobody would expect that they're friends because they're so different. And they just said that like 7 times in 45 seconds. And I was just laughing at the repetition of that. And then I immediately pegged them as Rainbow Dash and Applejack from My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, which is hilarious if you know those characters. So it's a shame that the face you just made, the camera was on me when you did that. I'm sure everybody can imagine, though. In any event, I kind of like the two of them as a potential, developing alliance, though.
I mean, I think they're interesting enough. I mean,
yeah,
that's the thing. There's nobody that I'm really disinterested in. I mean, there's people I don't have enough to know about.
Right. I mean, there's several people we haven't really heard much from. But there's no one that, like, they sort of started to set Nick up as someone maybe to not be that cool because he's kind of smarmy, but then he opens up later, which we're not quite there yet, but so he kind of brings it around a little bit and becomes sympathetic again.
I mean, yeah, I think they did a really good job with all of that, in this episode, with the exception of Natalie's really the only one I haven't gotten any kind of.
I felt sure she was going to go if Goliath's team lost. That seemed really obvious to me.
But you see a lot of really quick arcs with a lot of them. We already talked about John's, so we don't need to cover that. I mean, Christian's, we've talked a little bit about. I mean, he just like, he's so nerdy, but like he's kind of like endearing and again, to just say it again, like the fact that he like leans into it.
Yeah.
And then
there's the whole bit with Gabby where she's also kind of nerdy. She calls herself the nerd whisperer. And then there's the whole bit, another bit where he gets the confessional and he's kind of saying it's like, we don't want to make it too obvious though, because we don't want everyone to think we're a couple threat, a platonic couple threat. Yes. Awkward stare.
I mean, that was such
the camera just hangs on for a moment of him, clarifying platonic and then just kind of getting 1,000-yard stare for about 10 seconds.
Yep.
Not 10 seconds, but still, it was there was a moment there of like, like a couple, but not really.
Well, and then
But yeah,
Jessica, like we talked
it's all
about,
sweet.
like she leads in like with this very 18, but then you see her going and doing some things that like make some sense, and you're like, okay, yeah, she can. I mean, she can play. It's
Oh, yeah.
not
Being proactive at forming relationships with everybody is very important.
right. And then like I said, the thing with Nick, there was a lot of like these very fast arcs to get us
Yeah.
on board with people, and
Yeah, it was kind of really well put together in terms of giving us a sense of a lot of the people there.
yes.
This is where we got John with his list of nicknames. We kind of talked about that already, though, unless you have anything additional. We had more the developing Natalia versus Natalie conflict. And this is also where we had Mike going idol hunting.
Oh yeah, that's probably a thing to just talk about here. And that
Yeah, I don't know that there's a lot to say about it, except that it's sort of it's a little, we get a little bit of humor from him commenting to the camera that he doesn't think anyone will have noticed yet, and then we cut back to camp and everybody is in a group talking about it.
and just his like self-deprecation where he's just like, oh, everybody knew I was doing this and now I'm the target. Yeah.
Well, I'm committed now, might as well just keep going. Yep. And then that makes everybody go looking, and that's why they have such a crappy shelter, because they all went idol hunting instead. Yes. And on that note, we can go ahead and I guess jump briefly to the bit where Dan found the idol. I thought it was a super interesting choice to have the real idol look like a crappy fake, because that was a not impressive immunity idol. It like the necklace thing looked like it had been like woven together out of strips from different kinds of cloth. And then the actual idol itself was sort of just like a twisted bit of rope with some beads on it. It looked like the kind of fake that people make sometimes.
It feels like that's on purpose.
I'm sure it seems obvious to me too, because it was so dramatic that in its appearance that way. But being the real one, I thought that was kind of an interesting idea of having something that theoretically you might have a hard time convincing people. Now, theoretically, if you keep the little message, that could be proof. But we also know that, as the season develops, sometimes people hang on to the message and then try to use that to repackage with something else. And that's happened before.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see if anything comes of that. But, I definitely, when we first see him because we don't see him find it first. Instead, first what we get is everybody's looking for it. And then we have Dan laughing and everyone's looking, but it's in my pants. And then he pulls this thing out and I'm like, what? What is that? That's the real idol? And sure enough, it is. And then I think it was Jessica and Natalia that were right there with him when he found it. And so they know. I think those were the two.
Yep.
Yeah. So in any event, we have Allison. Wait, okay. I think I've blurred the lines a little bit between Allison and Angelina in my notes here. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, they were both big in the beginning, and Angelina talked about like they were both very part of that whole like. I mean, I know I went to John a lot with the sort of tongue-in-cheek chest pumping, but both of them did that also at the beginning.
Right. So I guess we had a little bit of stuff early on. Allison talking about they don't have to worry too much about strategy yet, but it seems like maybe Natalie and Mike rather are the early targets. Mm-hmm. But we see Natalie warn Mike. She's the one that tells him is like, dude, everybody knew what you were doing. So and they're looking out for you now. So. I couldn't help but think how sucky it must have been for everybody there to have it be raining so hard in those first couple of days. So they don't even have a chance to get a shelter up before it's just this torrent.
Yeah.
And that means that, like, you know, it's going to be hard to have anything in that shelter ever be completely dry at that point, you know, even once the rain stops, because it's just saturated from the beginning when you're putting it up.
Mm-hmm.
I did like Elizabeth described that, though, as getting the royal treatment from the island. I like that as a way to describe raining like hell and making it cold and miserable and wet. We're getting the royal treatment.
Yes.
But here's where we got something that, like, they obviously leaned hard on, but also seemed like it was coming naturally, which was that the David tribe getting along with each other way better than the Goliath tribe. Just all very mutually supportive. And, you know, they had that late night discussion about, you know, everybody's sort of respective traumas. Let's see. I don't want to skip some stuff. I was scrolling down a little bit. This is also where we got Nick talking about, like, it's easy to get away with not doing any work if you're good at doing that. Cut to people complaining that he's not doing any work, which is, you know, fairly typical sort of thing. And him also saying it's easy to get people to trust you. And then we cut to him being super smarmy to everybody he talks to.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those things where I felt like they were setting him up early on to be maybe like sort of a, you know, a mini boss villain, you know, like one of the early candidates to create conflict. But then later, when they have that night where everybody's kind of you know, sharing their various you know, issues, like Jessica finds herself getting really emotional, and I thought it was interesting her having that discussion of feeling like she always imagined herself as being the one who's comforting other people who get emotional, and to find herself in that position is bringing up stuff with her mom. And then that brings prompts. Is it B? I don't remember if they said it or it was just.
I don't remember what it was.
BI.
BI.
Yes, BI, but I don't remember if they said it in the show. But in any event, she talks about how she had been in an abusive relationship, and we get some of her background, that she's a Vietnamese refugee, and now she's apparently an MMA fighter, which is kind of exciting. And so they are really bonding, and I really related to Nick after that, where he's talking about how he didn't say anything at the time. He just felt awkward because he is not used to being in an environment where he feels comfortable opening up about personal, vulnerable stuff like that.
Right. And
so for him to be quiet during that initial conversation, but really be sort of processing it to the point where he felt like it seemed like he woke everybody up to unload this secret in the middle of the night. It's kind of how it seemed like. Yeah,
exactly. That's what the way they set it up made it feel to us watching. That's what I thought happened.
Yeah. And so for him to open up it felt 100% genuine too, because we could imagine a sociopath seeing everybody else bond with these trauma stories and saying, "Oh crap, I need something to make them trust me too." Like, we could imagine someone doing that theoretically, but that didn't feel like what was happening here.
Yeah.
And so it felt really sincere, and it felt like a catharsis for him, which is kind of awesome. Good for him, right? And it seemed like it really did kind of connect everybody. And so I was sort of surprised to see Nick, who sort of seems to be initially being set up as maybe, you know, a mini villain, you know, early season, you know, guy that everyone complains about. But then, I don't know, maybe he still will be, but at least he has been humanized by having this extra vulnerability.
Yeah.
Although technically all of that stuff, I don't want to skip over Davy catching the octopus because that was awesome.
That was really awesome.
Yeah, he was so excited. And that just made you want to cheer for him, right? Like, I mean, catching an octopus is great. I mean, that's a nice catch for, them, like, cooking that up. It's, it's exotic and good protein, and octopus is actually pretty tasty. I mean, I don't know about like wild octopus that you cook over a campfire as opposed to sushi or whatever, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of exciting just in the abstract. But he was so excited; it made me really happy for him.
Yeah.
And we hadn't really seen anything from him yet, so it was kind of like, and he talks about being a blurred black nerd, and
yeah, I'd never heard of that term. That was funny.
Yeah, I had just from a few people on Twitter, but it's and he talks about zombies, and briefly talks Mario Kart with Christian, and I'm like, yeah, all right, I like him.
Yeah,
catches octopus, likes zombies. What else do you need to know? So I think that pretty much brings us up to the immunity challenge.
That's my dog right now.
Aw.
That's how he feels about our discussion. Anyway, the immunity challenge.
In the immunity challenge, in the pouring rain.
Yeah, you.
And and I immediately, as he's describing all the obstacles, I saw that pole vault thing. And like, even if I wasn't primed to be expecting some kind of an accident, I think that one would have stood out to me, that like, that would have been one of the slightly more potentially dangerous obstacles in the best of times. But in the driving rain, when you're in a hurry, that seems like it would be really easy for someone in a hurry to just fall down that hole.
Yeah.
Especially because there was a couple of people who weren't really putting their feet on their platform. They were just kind of trying to hold themselves up with their arms.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really think about it too much, and now I'm trying to remember back. If you had fallen down the hole, would you have landed on ground or ocean?
They didn't really show what was down there, but it was not in the water.
Okay. So there may have been actually like a pad that, because if they didn't show it,
maybe there was something, but it would have been at least a 6 or 7 foot fall onto whatever it was, and you would be falling down to where the pole and the hinge are. Now maybe they had some sort of a cushion over it, but
that's why they didn't show it. Yeah.
Yeah, and even still though, like even if it's cushioned down at the bottom, falling down in that hole and hitting your head on the edge of the other side would be enough to really hurt someone.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm not saying it was like that. It was immune to.
Oh yeah, no. So I mean, I was, like obviously everyone, it turned out okay, but it especially because I was primed to be expecting some kind of an accident. I was like, oh God, is that it? So I was stressed out during that part of the challenge. Especially with the David tribe, just because they were a little bit more clumsy with it. The Goliath tribe seemed like they had their act together a little bit better with it. Let's see. They had the interesting first obstacle that was designed to sort of make everybody have to collide with each other because they're having to go through the same gaps from opposite directions. There was a couple of brief moments where it seemed like they were deliberately trying to hold people from the other tribe back, and I was thinking, like, what's the gain in that? Because your team can't go until everybody's there. So if you are staying behind to hold other members of the tribe behind, what's the benefit there?
Yeah, the only thing I could think of when I saw that was that what they were thinking is that I'll be faster getting there than this person who I'm holding back. So if I can kind of let my tribe sort themselves out.
Yeah.
But I don't think there was that much processing. I think it
was just kind of instinct.
Yeah, what it really came down to is like, oh, if they get to the thing first, then they win and they get to move on. So I'm going to stop them from getting there first. And that was literally the extent of the processing.
Right.
Yeah.
So the other really interesting thing I think about this challenge was that there was a challenge design philosophy reversal in this challenge. And that was having the first tribe through the obstacle gets to use the machete, and the second tribe has to untie the rope, which will exacerbate a lead rather than making it closer. Usually these challenges seem designed to try to produce a close finish, right? And so what they would tend to do is make it easier when you're the second group through, if anything. So to try to produce a close finish, but this was a design decision that was designed to extend the lead of whoever gets there first.
Right, which is fitting with the show theme, which
yeah,
well, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. I just thought it was interesting because it was definitely counter to the way most challenges have been designed in the past. I mean, it still ended up really close. I mean, you know, the David tribe with Christian as caller clearly were doing the puzzle faster in the abstract, but they were far enough behind when they started that it was not fast enough. But it just, you know, it made me think all the more about that one little mechanic, because if not for that, they might have won. But in any event, let's see. During the puzzle, there was a little bit more of the emphasis on this idea that the Goliath tribe were kind of yelling at each other and arguing while they work on the puzzle, whereas the David tribe was sort of calmer and working better together.
It just feels like that's a narrative they're building.
Yeah,
that we're going to see, you know, over multiple weeks that may turn into something, you know.
Right. I mean, it seems like it's organic in the sense that it was really happening, but they're definitely emphasizing it.
Yes.
With the editing. But in any event, the Goliaths win. It's not, you know, they lost most of their lead by the end, but it was still enough. So we have going back to camp. We have, or you know, getting ready to go back to camp. We have Lyrsa talking about she doesn't really trust Nick. She says that's maybe the consensus, and so maybe he's still the first to go, even if you know, he had bonded with everybody a little bit. But then, of course, we come back from commercial and everything's different because, you know, it's very abrupt. We talked about this a little bit already, but it was just, you know, we're back to commercial, and the first shot back from commercial is the medical team carrying a stretcher onto the beach from the boat. And we're already, and it was just like, whoa, what happened? We didn't, you know, I don't think we've ever seen on the show something like this where there's no context around it.
Right. Yeah, it felt like I had to rewind it, and because I was I watched it like on delayed on DVR. I had to rewind it and be like, what did I miss?
Right.
You know, did I all of a sudden, you know, fast forward like, and I thought something was a commercial and I missed the whole thing, and I did, I didn't like it. They edited it very abrupt as well. Like, yeah. I mean, it was just weird that you left and the normal flow of the show. And, you know, and I was kind of primed for something odd because I was looking at it and, you know, I'm fast forwarding through the commercials and I'm like, there's only like 3 minutes left. And yeah, they seem like they settled on Nick.
It doesn't seem like there's enough time for a whole tribal council left in the episode.
Right. Because they've also, you know, sowed some seeds of Pat and, you know, what's going on here? Like, is this going to be some nonsense where they, you know, extend it till next week and we don't get to watch tribal council like until next week?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know, because that's something that ABC has done with the Bachelor, which I watched with my wife, but they've started like playing around with that where, you know, what used to be the traditional end of the show, which is when people get voted off or get roses, they sometimes shift into like the next week because it like makes it more of a cliffhanger. And I was starting to get frustrated. I'm like, they can't do this. And then all of a sudden, like, you know, so I'm thinking all these things, and then it gets to the point, and there's just a guy laying on a beach with a bunch of people like around him. And I was like, wait, what? Huh? Did I miss something? Because I was thinking about something else. And yeah, super abrupt.
Right. So I read an interview, a brief interview with Probst about all of that. And so he provided a little bit of context, which is to say that stuff that happens behind the scenes for Survivor in a very sort of straightforward, obvious way is that lots of times where the challenge is actually a significant distance from the camp beach. And so they have everybody get on a boat to go between them. Right. It seems obvious, really, that has to happen. And he provided the information that the viewers are not missing anything, because part of the sort of production rules is that everybody is what they call it on lockdown on those boat trips, which means no one is allowed to talk to each other when they're in those boats. And sometimes it's a van, depending on, if it's an overland versus over the boat. And it's just in this context, it was just the water was very choppy because of all of the weather, and just bad luck, apparently. I mean, we heard a little bit about this on the episode, that it was just coming down off of a big wave. It just was an impulse, and he just somehow in his position he was in, he just absorbed the momentum badly, I guess. Because, so it's hard to know exactly what happened. And I mean, we learn at the end that ultimately, he was in a lot of pain because back stuff can be messed up and painful. Turned out that thankfully there's no permanent injury, but that's the sort of thing you don't want to mess around with that. Right. Yeah. So it seemed like it was super obvious for us, the viewer, what was going to happen. And yet it was kind of heartbreaking watching Probst have to take some time to convince Pat of what was really obvious from the beginning of that sequence, which is he does not look okay. And this seems far too serious for them to really even consider allowing him to stay. I mean, there's been times when people, passed out and fainted and, they have to lay down and get hydrated for a few minutes, but they're okay afterwards. But I can't breathe. I can't see what's happening. It hurts. I can't breathe.
Yeah, there's a pain in my back. None of that is. No. Yeah, you need.
It's you need X-rays, maybe CAT scan,
MRIs, all that. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So. It's such a bummer to have people leave for medical reasons, and especially with Pat, because he was interesting. And so I'm sure it was a big relief to everybody else, just that they didn't have to also still go to tribal council. I mean, how much would that have sucked?
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, obviously, we see that Pat was fine however many months later. Hopefully they notified his tribe mates, I mean, hopefully they figured it out very quickly that he was going to be okay, that he just had.
In the interview, Probst says he had trouble walking for a few days and then more or less made a full recovery. So it seemed like what it must have been is just a severe muscle spasm that was, triggered by landing funny. From the wave. That sounds like what it was. They didn't really go into detail, but I mean, I think recovering after a few days, that seems likely that that's what it was. Back muscles are weird that way,
Oh yeah.
So, it's hard to second guess any of the decisions made there. It seems like it was really the obvious thing, but still hard, especially given that he was so upset about it, in as much pain as he was in, not wanting to go, and not wanting people to think of him as a quitter, and Probst having to say,
"You're not quitting.
Nobody's gonna think you're a quitter here."
Yeah, you're not quitting. We're quitting you.
Yes. But I would like to hope that this, this is the sort of circumstance where you sort of feel like maybe it would be nice to have him get another chance to play in the future in another season, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting enough. Like he's compelling enough. I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and ready-made story of like the heartbreak of his first season, having to get evacuated day 3.
Yeah. Before the first vote. I mean, that's
yeah. So that's it's kind of a sour note to end the episode on. But overall, I think that it has some interesting promise for the season. It had a couple of interesting wrinkles to the challenges. The themes are always a little goofy, but at least this one seems to have allowed the 2 tribes to form kind of a coherent identity, both amongst themselves and in relation to the other tribe. So that's interesting. And got some interesting people. No one that I really hate. That's always nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when Natalie is like our least favorite because she crosses her arms and looks grumpy, that's not really a hate. I mean, that's just...
Well, it's also like we have to be fair to her in the sense of like it's been some miserable freaking weather that they've had in those first couple of days.
Exactly.
Like, she's just in a bad mood because that sucks. So maybe weather clears up, she'll smile and it'll be all right as rain is the odd figure of speech to use there, but sure. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. But yeah, like if that's the character that's sort of least appealing on our first impression, that's a pretty, that's still a pretty good crop of castaways. So next time, we will Natalie Napalm is a phrase that someone uses. Lyric's name is thrown out. Christian is in charge with Pat Gon. Who knows? So we'll see.
We will definitely just wait and see. It's pretty early.
Yeah. All right. So thank you, everybody, for watching and/or listening. And we'll be back next week for more talking about Survivor.
Yes, we will.